Welcome to Movie and a Beer, everybody. This is Dan bringing us in, and we have a really interesting, I guess, foreign film, because this is like from India. I don't think it's a Bollywood production, but it sort of has that vibe a little bit.
Bollywood.
All right, and we got a couple
of Bollywood, but no singing and no dancing.
So is that Bollywood, really? I don't know.
Yeah, it still comes out of India.
It's an evolution.
It is.
An iteration of
We have a couple awesome friends here that have already started commenting to help us along the way as we journey down the train tracks of this most evolving and interesting film.
Right. This is Aaron. I'm so happy you're with us, dear listener. I'm your train heist expert.
And this is Brian. I'm your 2-act structure expert.
Nice. Oh. This film we're talking about came out the beginning of July 2024.
In the United States.
In the United States. It had been released in India prior to that, and it's called Kill. Kill. Very simple title.
Yeah.
Which you do get to see at some point, but we're not going to talk about that yet. We pulled an audible on a film that we were going to watch and decided to watch this one instead after we were like, yeah, we don't want to watch that. So I think this is a good option. We had a couple of beers. We did not change up on the beers because they still had some relevance to the movie at hand. I had known what we were going to watch ahead of time, and I had sought something out because I knew it was going to be like kind of, rough and tumbly action film evening. So we got a Pash the Tinny, it says Fairly Clear Pale Ale. So it's not an IPA because it's only at 5.4%, but that's from Ilk Beer, which is out of Olympia. And the second one that we did was Other Traveler, which is an American pale ale from Ruse Brewing here in Portland. And we'll talk about those in a little bit, but both of those were selected based on the artwork on the cans, which seemed to speak to the other film a little bit more than this one, but the term traveler does really, and the fact the guy is biting into a can on the Ilk Pash the Tinny kind of fits in because there's a lot of violence and things going on with this film that we watched.
This is definitely an action movie. There's, I would say, the words grisly images were used before, and I think that's kind of an apt descriptor. I think with action movies, like sometimes there can be a really simple plot, and the movie can still work. And sometimes even with a simple plot and a simple premise, there can be complicated emotions and complicated characters that are moving within that framework. And Kill, I think, does that well. You understand our protagonist. I think his name is Amit, I believe. You understand him perfectly. You know kind of what he's thinking and feeling. There are some cutbacks and flashback scenes that show up to help the audience understand what's going on in Amit's mind at any one moment. And to really explain his motivations. I think all that's really well done. There are some action movies where the emphasis is so much on the action and less on like the character is feeling really, really pissed off, and this is
right. Yeah, before we get into kind of the details of the movie, we should go over a quick synopsis of the film.
Absolutely right.
Without giving anything away.
Absolutely right.
There's one place in this film where the action changes significantly. And we're going to try really hard not to spoil it, because I doubt if the listener has seen this before.
Right.
Yeah.
But this is basically a film of a Indian commando, and his girlfriend of several years has been awarded as an arranged wedding.
Yeah.
As an arranged marriage to someone else.
Yeah. And it seemed like there was a lot of money involved because there was like a new car and you get to see that presentation of the arrangement.
It's suggested there's some business interests behind this arrangement.
Yeah.
But as she's taking a train to Delhi.
The engagement party is going from the place of the engagement to Delhi for the marriage. And her boyfriend sneaks on the train to propose to her and get married on the train on the way to Delhi.
Yep, and then preempts the arranged marriage. But that plan himself is preempted because bandits. This isn't too much of a spoiler, I think.
No, it's in the trailer. You know that there's people that got on the train that they're on, and he and his friend are on the train just circumstantially. He was going to meet her in New Delhi and propose, and he decided, let's just get on the train and do it on the train.
Right.
And be more safe, because she has already got a ring on her finger.
Right.
She's already been proposed in the arranged marriage. And she even says that to her dad, I'd be able to do something that I wanted to do if it wasn't arranged. She had no idea who she was getting married to.
Right.
Right. I think her dad knew, but she didn't. But all that's preempted because bandits stage a train heist.
Yeah. And up until the title sequence, you assume that this is kind of a Die Hard plot.
Yeah. And it turns very much not that way very quickly.
Yeah.
At the halfway point. So this is like 90, little more than 90 minutes.
No spoilers, Dan. No spoilers.
But
It's an hour and 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Right.
And at about 45 minutes in, the title comes up.
Yeah.
And that is
Spoils it.
clearly the end of Act 1
And beginning of Act 2.
beginning of Act 2. And this is definitely a film that has a 2-act structure, I would say.
Yeah.
Motivations are there. I mean, the commandos from the military know that you shouldn't kill people, so they're making an effort to just the people that are
The body count is
robbing.
extremely low.
Yes, he's doing non-lethal blows and he's just trying to knock people out.
Right.
And that all changes.
And the bandits who are evil,
Mm-hmm.
they have killed a couple people to get their way as they're looting the train.
Right. That's not their primary objective, but they don't have the same set of principles or restraint.
Yeah.
that
So
our
like the first
protagonist
10 to 15 minutes really talks about Armit and he's a commando. You see him on his base with his best friend and they're buddying around. He was going to try to propose to her at the announcement of the engagement and had the ring, and he decided not to do it. He talked to the Tulika.
Tulika, the fiance, and she kind of talked him out of his plan, saying like,
Yeah.
"This is not a good time. You know, my father's friends have like real guns here, and like they might be drunk enough, they might be crazy enough. Let's not take
her
risks."
father is a shipping magnate.
Yeah.
But it also seems like he may kind of be a mob boss a little bit.
Sort of feels that way.
Sort of.
A little bit. He certainly had police connections, or he was certainly
Yeah.
influential.
But certainly the engagement party wasn't the time to propose.
Right. So
He proposed in a commode on the train.
Yes.
as one does. Right?
Very romantic.
with beautiful aromatics abound.
Yeah.
That even gets mentioned.
One of the criticisms I think I'd have of this movie is like that love story seems a little. They could have done more with it, because we get that he loves her, and we do see sequences of that relationship, both contemporaneously, but also then like in flashbacks throughout the movie.
Yeah. Well, I think it may be a difference in sensibility. It felt very kind of Gilmore Girls. I even mentioned it, that the soundtrack, every time there was a love scene.
All right.
It was this kind of treacly, soft piano
Stuff going on, yeah.
Some soft guitar. Something
Yeah,
like
and
that.
it didn't feel, to an Indian audience, maybe it felt very romantic, but it was a little bit syrupy, sweet, and surface to me.
Yeah, didn't really dive too deep into. I mean, they'd known each other for a long time because they have flashbacks going back a ways.
There was like this is not a spoiler, but there was like a 4-year anniversry scene that was like, "Oh, you remember our anniversary every year?" And he's like, "Yeah, well, of course I do."
I mean, the chemistry wasn't really there.
Not really.
And I think part of it was just kind of the treacly piano underneath the love scenes really kind of cheapened it for me.
So the question is, traditional. She was being married off. I mean, that's the structure of that society and their culture. And she said, this is not going to go over well if we elope. And she was trying to still have honor to her father and her family. And I think while they might have been all kissy smoochy off camera, on camera, those scenes and those flashbacks were very much touchy-feely, like superficial, not a lot of PDA going on, a little hand-holding, and that's it. No kissing,
like
nothing.
Emotional. It was emotional weight, emotional intimacy, not like physical.
So I think they did that in probably respect of the fact that is still happening in their culture today is arranged marriages. And while it's okay to have someone you actually love, you still have to respect the family.
But there was a really telling line, though, of when at one point her father says, "Well, why didn't you tell me about this other guy? I had no idea." And she had this sort of like defensive, like, "Oh, it wouldn't have mattered. You're too stubborn. You wouldn't have listened to me."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and the soldier clearly didn't have money, didn't come from a wealthy business family.
Right.
And so maybe, that alliance was cemented with the arranged marriage.
I think it was definitely like a kind of oligarchy, family business type situation.
Yeah.
One of the questions I want to ask, it's not, I would say not like a typical Bollywood film because there's not like the dance numbers and there's not the singing. But I'm wondering, like, could this film have been made in France? Could it have been made in Germany? Could it have been made elsewhere and have the same kind of weight? Like, maybe some of the details about the arranged marriage and other things might have to change. But is this like very much an Indian story, or could this have been told anywhere else? And how would it be different?
That's a really good question. I think that with the sense of it originated out of created and filmed, and all the actors are Indian, and they do speak a few English phrases are thrown in, but not a lot. The intention, I think, of this is not really religious. That doesn't really come up. But again, I'm going to fall back to the simple fact that it's part of their culture and it still exists. That still happens. Arranged marriages still happen. So unless it's an Indian family living in another country, I don't think that kind of conflict, that internal conflict she faced, and she ended up sacrificing herself basically for him. She was trying to save him in some way.
Yeah, well, she wouldn't allow him to propose at the engagement ceremony.
Correct.
To save him.
All right.
And she was willing to be part of the arranged marriage so that he wouldn't get killed by her family.
Yeah.
Right.
That might be it. Just a specific.
Even though that was all kind of in the background. But to your question, I think this could be told in any other culture.
It probably could.
Because
it's like fiance, lover.
The most interesting thing about this film doesn't hinge on the arranged marriage at all.
Right.
Which is the fact that it's kind of a 2-act structure. There's one significant event, which I'm not going to spoil, which happens about halfway through, which the rest of the action of the film follows after.
Right.
Yeah, so some of the
and resolves.
Some of the reviews are that it skips over or doesn't necessarily dive as deep into some of that romanticism.
Right.
It kind of doesn't. It just barely touches on that a little bit with the music and the mood when they do have the flashbacks of them together, and that this is more of just a straight action film. As I'm reading this review about like how it was received in India, it was like it was well received because it's an action film, and they don't get a lot of those. It's all. They wanted to have a little
singing
sappiness.
and dancing.
Yeah, they wanted to have a little sappiness, but
I do want to say, like, if this was an American action film, I would expect way more gunplay and some explosions. The notable lack of explosion, and like that didn't like that. Dear listener, that does not mean there's any less tension or any less excitement. This film drives forward. I think
it was very much kind of a martial arts film. I would say,
yeah, kind of almost like a Bruce Lee kind of in that.
Yeah.
While it does have the bad guys, not all the bad guys are obvious. Some of them, they talk to each other, and the leaders of the group say, yes, we should follow the certain guidelines that I set forth. The principles. And the son is like, what principles? We're thieves. We're a band of bandits.
Right. Yeah. Some of them have this
gentleman robber.
This feeling that, that banditry is a noble ancient profession.
Right.
And they're just doing what they've meant to do and they've done for generations.
Yeah. So, I mean, the really interesting thing, though, is there's a lot of passengers that are just sitting there freaked out and people getting fight scenes literally right in front of them. And also because it's such small quarters.
They're very passive.
Very passive. And Brian was pointing out that the way that the shots are done, because it's a very small space between, the hallway to walk down the middle of these sleeper cars is really small.
It's very claustrophobic.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But a lot of I would say 80% of the film is shot in an aspect ratio that is almost like an iPhone. It's just the middle third of the screen, because the rest are sleeper cars and doors and hallways.
Yeah. If I can kind of expand on the setting somewhat, during this movie, I was thinking about the setting of the train specifically. And I was reminded, there was a movie in, I think it was maybe 2003, 2001, called Phone Booth.
Yeah, it just only shoots the phone booth.
And
the whole time.
90% of that movie is in the phone booth. And I'm going to be, maybe this is an unpopular opinion. I was so bored with phone booth because I thought, like, how do you make a movie interesting when it all takes place in 4 square feet? And the answer for me at that point was, you don't.
Right.
I
I really don't remember much about the film.
Well, it's forgettable.
So,
But here, I feel like, the train is certainly not as constraining as a phone booth, but I feel like the setting of the train matched like the movement of the action, kind of a metaphor for, this barreling forward in this kind of sequence of events that cannot be stopped once it's started. And like the way that the cinematography shows, it's framed between doors, it's framed between seats, it's framed between train windows. Well, kind of over and over again, the way that it sets the action on the screen in an interesting way. I'm wondering, are there other movies that you can think of that, have a setting similar to this? I think of like Lawrence of Arabia being so expansive and open in the desert. The desert is almost a feature of the movie. Here, the train, I think, is almost a feature of the movie too.
Yeah, it gets used by both the good guys and the bad guys as part of a weapon. Because you can smack somebody's head if it's right there, and you see them throwing people up and pushing them against it and smacking people's head against the side. There's a lot of corners. There's a lot of close corners. There's curtains. A lot of metal.
A lot of curtains, too.
Yeah. And that sets up a lot of the suspense, and there's some good drama that's built behind that. And we were talking about a little bit about the
There's
soundtrack.
a lot of tension. Yeah. The tension is continuous for the entire film.
I'd say,
after they get on the train, it's tense.
The pacing, I think, got a lot better after they got on the train.
Yeah.
The very first part of the movie was a little uneven.
It's just setting up the background. You have to have some information when you go in. Otherwise, it's like, oh, what's even the title of the film? Well, you're not going to see that for a little while.
Right.
Again, I think there were some interesting selections with the soundtrack. It had both contemporary, it had really nice classical piano, it had some guitar, it had some... just a full range of different kinds of music. And then the sound design of when people's head got smacked or when a blade went whooshing by.
You heard like a tin can or a tin pan bashing against somebody and the ringing of the metal in their head when they
I thought that was
hard.
Really, really well done. I think the lighting was well done. There was a few scenes that were low lighting. It wasn't dark completely, but the guy goes off and this is in the trailer with the fire extinguisher. And it creates a huge cloud. And I'm just, dry chemical is going to disperse like that under pressure. And it's going to make a big cloud. And it had a really nice dramatic effect.
In a fight scene, often, there's one character that throws a punch. And then the work is really on the character receiving that punch to move in a believable way as though they just got punched. Right. And I think this movie did a really good job with making it believable, kind of showing the action in a way that was mostly easy to follow and understand what was happening for the most part. And then also to make it all very believable in terms of what's the physics of what's happening. The kinetic.
Except for both of the soldiers, both of the commandos, those guys could take a lot of damage.
Yeah.
In that way, I felt it was a little unrealistic.
But true.
And toward the end, I was really feeling like, okay, I can no longer suspend my disbelief.
This is like John Wick. He's been stabbed 24 times.
Kicked in the ribs 42 times.
He's been stabbed with a large knife in the gut. His shoulder got chopped twice.
Boy Kill World too, where it's like they were getting up after they wouldn't have been getting up.
Yeah. He shouldn't have been getting up. But hey, maybe the adrenaline and love, that's what the antagonist was talking about. His love is compelling him to fight. It's bringing.
We've been love bombed as one of the villains. I'm going to say the villains are actually kind of in some ways kind of likable. Some of them,
yeah. The head evil villain, he was not likable. He was definitely evil,
right?
But some of them, they were just guys, and this is their job.
Yeah.
Going back to the fight sequences, there was one thing that I kind of didn't like, and this happened more in the kind of the first half. I got confused on geography several times. I didn't think the editing and the shooting was quite on par because they would flip screen direction. They'd go across the 180-degree angle quite a bit. And part of that was the constraints of the small set.
The train compartment.
Compartments. But there were some times where I lost track of some characters. Like I asked these guys, where did the boss go?
Yeah, where'd they go? And we're like, I have no idea. He just disappeared.
He's no longer in the scene for some reason.
Yeah, they ran up to the next car. And you don't know if they were going forward or backwards either in the cars.
Right.
You don't, I mean, they lined up some phones and said, this is this car, this car, this car, like the four.
In one scene.
In one scene. And you feel like, well, there's got to be 20 plus cars on this train.
Right.
And there were. We don't know where within the train they were, if they were towards the back, I believe, and not towards the front. Towards the end, they do.
And sometimes geography mattered in the train because his girlfriend and her family, they were in one car. The villains were in another car. He was climbing over the top of a car.
My counterpoint to that is I think our protagonist didn't necessarily know where the bandits were in the train either.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think it kind of does match some of the confusion that the characters had. However, a point well taken, Brian. Like, yeah, some of those early scenes, it was sort of confusing to know how to orient yourself because you didn't know which way was forward.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a door on each end and, everything's rocking a little bit, but you don't know, are you facing the direction you're headed or the direction you've come from?
Right.
And that's okay. I mean, and you had mentioned, well, this is kind of a high-speed rail, so it rocked a little bit more when it slowed down, which it did a few times, but I tell you, no, I've been on high-speed trains, and they sway more than rock. It's a slower sway.
Right.
But in India, who knows? I mean, and this did look like not an old train. It wasn't a super high-speed rail, but,
Probably the set wasn't moving. It was probably a set built on a soundstage.
Probably.
And they weren't going to pay some dude to rock the set for hours and hours every day.
It does remind me of Star Wars in the original film, the Millennium Falcon. They actually had crew members pushing the set back and forth to have the movement go.
Yeah,
and then all of the characters would like shake and move at the same direction at the same time, which was like clever low tech way.
That didn't really happen in this one at all.
No, it didn't. No, there was no crew shaking train cars.
There was a few instances where they would open a door to the outside of the train and you'd see stuff flying by.
But I think that was mostly green screen.
Yeah, that was all green screen. And then there was also the whole notion of you want to sit here and you want to believe that he's on top of the train and he can walk if it's a fast moving train going 60, 70, 80 miles an hour. The wind's going to blow him off.
Yeah.
But he's standing up there. The bad guy first goes up there and stands up there, and you're just like, okay, that's not believable.
What? So I know,
and it was total green screen too. It did not even look good. It looked like bad TV green screen.
You could tell it was like a little lower production standard than maybe what we're used to seeing. But I know we've been talking about the movie for a bit, and we'll pivot to beers. But before we do, I want to just ask kind of a comparison, contrast to some of the other action movies and some of the other Indian films that we've watched this year. So RRR, Sisu, Monkey Boy. How does Kill stack up to some of these other titles?
Well, first, Monkey Boy, we haven't done an episode on.
Oh, we just watched it.
We watched it, but we didn't do an episode.
But we should.
We should.
And coming in the future, Monkey Boy.
Right.
But I would say RRR was way better than this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But this was a good film. Mm-hmm. Sisu, I wasn't there for the podcast, but I've seen it.
Very violent. That one focused more on the violence and the purpose behind the violence. This one was more just revenge driven. It was, well, I mean, it's obviously he's going after them because they got on the train and they killed a bunch of people. That's all I'm going to say. And it's wrong. And he's a commando. He's in the military. He has to do what's right.
He's the protector.
He's the protector. And he gets called that by the bad guys. Oh, you're not a very good protector of these people, are you?
Yeah. How are you going to keep India safe?
Correct. And then it's like, oh, you're a monster because you're killing us. We only killed 4 of you, but you killed all of us. And it's like, well, yeah, because you killed the wrong people. Let's just leave it at that.
So
the comment about Sisu makes sense though, because here we see more of what the character's emotion and motivation is. Sisu was just like violence. Man loses his stuff and he wants it back.
Right. Yeah.
You stole my things. I want it back. Yes.
I mean, of those films we're talking about, I like them more than this. Mm-hmm. But this was still entertaining, and it's definitely something I don't see very often, which is
Bollywood without singing and dancing.
Yeah.
Bollywood, and also just the 2-act structure. Yeah, I mean, I can only think of a couple other films that are structured kind of the same way.
I have never seen a title card so late in a movie.
Right.
Like, I mean, I can't remember.
I mean, and that may be something that we just, we've seen them at the end of movies.
Yeah.
I've seen a few of those, but the standards and what people are used to in other countries, we don't watch a lot of foreign films. I mean,
Right.
I don't have any idea if that's something that's more common other places, especially, Bollywood puts out a lot of film, like
Right.
way more than Hollywood does. And they're trending and doing what they think they should do.
It's a different
for their
tradition, for
audience.
sure. Yeah.
And
I think I agree. I mean, it sounds like we all recommend this movie, especially
Yeah,
to action
yeah.
fans.
Yeah.
I think I agree. I liked RRR more. I found it kind of more engaging. There were the characters in there I thought were kind of more developed. And then, Sisu, I would rate it maybe a little bit better than this, but I still, like, listener, please don't misunderstand me. This is a great movie. You should watch it.
Yeah, yeah.
But Monkey Boy, Sisu, and RRR, I think, had a little more emotional weight. Maybe
And I think the production value is a little better. The story,
Mm-hmm.
at least on all of those, there was an actual real, at least character-driven story that was more believable.
They were more complex stories.
Right.
This
by
was
far.
very, very shallow. This is
It was
really simple.
It was simple.
And there's nothing wrong with simple. There's absolutely nothing wrong with simple.
I mean, before we get to the beers, I would also say that this is not kid appropriate.
Oh, no.
good.
and
gosh,
and,
no,
and,
yeah.
and it is violent and
It's not
at
that, not
places-
that gory. It's a little gory.
at
Too
pla-
violent almost.
When it gets gory, I would say it would. For me, it goes one step too far.
Yeah.
The gory parts are like a Tarantino film, but then they go 1 second further
Well,
than he would go.
Yeah, and it's a little, and there is some suspension of belief. I mean, there's no way this dude, anyone that's a normal person, and the thing is there's no there's no visual, computer graphics in this. This is all practical. This is all from the standpoint of it's a sound stage. There's no robots punching robots here. It's choreographed fight scenes.
Yes.
Really
Yeah.
well done. I mean, some of them are really interesting, but some of it's not believable. Like, you can't just break somebody's arm backwards on something that easily.
On a whim.
On a whim. That's you'd have to be incredibly superhumanly strong.
This does seem to turn some of the grisliness up to 11 at different points.
Yeah.
And so, Brian, like, I think I agree with your criticism that, it could have been a great action movie without taking that extra step in maybe, 6 different places in the film.
Yeah, it wasn't continual. A lot of the
right.
fights were just no blood whatsoever.
Yeah,
Two
it's
people just
getting hit with a
punched.
hammer.
But then when
Yeah.
it went there, it really didn't
went
set a
there.
lot of boundaries for itself.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Which,
Right.
there's something to be said for that. And there's an audience for that. And maybe that's something that
Actually-
is common with these types of action films in Bollywood. There's either romance and what happened in RRR. There was not a lot of blood in that movie.
No.
No.
It was violence, but the violence was contained, very, very self-contained for a purpose. And it wasn't gratuitous. This wasn't that.
But if somebody
It wasn't done without malice. It wasn't done with malice. It was done purposefully, and it was contained. But it did, again, as you said, it took it to that next step where you showed a little bit more than you should have, and it's squeamish for those that aren't used to that.
If somebody liked Kill Bill, though, or somebody's a Tarantino fan, I think
love
they're
this.
really going to like this movie a lot. Like, and like, anybody that likes action movies generally, I think is going to enjoy this film.
Yeah,
especially with
absolutely.
friends. But
Yeah.
if you're a Tarantino fan, like, absolutely take the time, take the trouble of finding it.
It's not as well written as a Tarantino.
Fair point. Fair point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we're ready to move on at this part of the podcast to talk about some beers. We will revisit some of the great thoughts about this film as we think about how did the beers go with this film. And as mentioned before, we have Pash the Tinny Fairly Clear Pale Ale from Ilk Beer, which is out of Olympia, Washington. And the other one is Other Travelers American Pale Ale by Ruse Brewing. So the first one, we decided just to pour and do a half glass each. I had this beer once before and was like, wow, this is like super gigantic aromatic. This has a lot of acidic hop, forwardness to it. There is some marketing copy on the can, Aaron. So the can has somebody that's like a surfer guy or maybe like a video character with sunglasses that's crushing a can in his mouth. And it's really nice, well done art. It's like illustrative art. And we had to look up the word pash, which is kind of like to open mouth kiss or to...
Yeah, we are not Australian. We're not down with the lingo.
To cuddle.
To cuddle. And
Or to crush on.
Correct.
To emotionally. Yeah.
So there's a reason it's called that. And Aaron, if you'd be so kind, I do have it written down here. If you'd like to,
That's
read
easier
it
to
off of that.
read.
It'd probably be a little.
Oh
easier
my
to
gosh,
read.
this is so much easier to read. This all-Australian hop ale is our ode to some of our favorite hops from down under. Topaz, Vic Secret, and Galaxy are paired with a light malt base and fermented with our House Yorkshire Ale yeast strain for a beer bright in tropical fruits and citrus with a touch of dank.
It's the dankness is what I catch the most of. It's a little cloudy, so it's like partially opaque. You can see through it a little bit, but is kind of like dirty dishwater yellow. And 5.4 alcohol by volume, which isn't terribly high, and that's why it would be a pale ale and not an IPA because it's below 6%.
I was getting like a lot of like resin, a lot of pine, the sort of conifer, like botanical.
It was very, very forward in aromatics. I'm glad I poured it because it just hit you in the face.
I actually really enjoyed the smell of it.
And it dried out a lot. It was very bitter and then dry.
Yep.
Which is fine, which is I appreciate.
I think the intensity of it though matched this movie well, just because of the intensity of what's on screen. This is not a movie that lets up. The intensity that we had with Pash the Tinny, I think it worked. Like this is not a subtle beer.
Yes. Brian, any other thoughts on this other than you did like it? I mean, I'm going to disagree with you. I was offended by this beer.
It was fun. I enjoyed the aroma a lot. The flavor, not so much. I actually enjoyed the second beer more.
Yeah. Was it too intense?
It's too bitter for me.
Okay. Yeah, and I don't know if it's the Topaz or the Vic Secret, which are Australian hops, which they tend to be more floral sometimes. They tend to be more sharp from the acidity, from what I remember. But I don't have enough palate remembrance to know for sure. Galaxy definitely is something you use in juicy IPAs, so that's why it's kind of like, there's that dankness to it, and that's what's going to help bring that forward. A Yorkshire ale yeast, which I have no idea what specifically, if that a British strain of some sort, which I think lent to a thinner malt body. It didn't have a lot of effervescence. It did have a nice big white foamy head that lasted pretty good, but the beer itself laid on the tongue a little flat, which is okay. But yeah, I mean, it's a drinkable beer. If you can find it, try it. It's definitely different. I applaud Ilk for trying to do something different. This is definitely not a standard IPA or a pale ale. It kind of mixes styles a little bit, which is interesting. And there's a whole bunch of copy on this other beer. So Ruse Brewing, which is here in Portland. Other Travelers American Pale Ale. So again, below 6%. So it's not an IPA or India Pale Ale, even though we watched a film from India. This is, I believe, balanced, flagrant, and lucid. That's the main words, but there's a whole bunch of other copy, Aaron.
Fragrant. Yeah. We are going to need a bigger boat for this summertime hop buster. Open your jaws and sip on waves of a splendid citrusy combo of Chinook, Amarillo, and New Zealand Cascade, brewed in collaboration with the dynamic duo at
Nebulous
Beer. Thank you, Tim.
Yeah. I have not heard of Nebulous. I'm not sure where they're from, but I got this because the original movie that we were going to watch had something to do with someone traveling.
Well,
and lo and behold,
we're now we
shifted over. We did the Audible, and we're definitely talking about other travelers. So the other travelers that came onto the train and were trying to rob everybody. Which initially they did, and then they discovered, we can make money by kidnapping people,
taking hostages. Yeah,
and then that kind of went really sideways really fast. This beer, for me, way more shallow in its hop presence. A lot more rounded in the flavor profile. I think it balanced more with the malt, which was a little bit more white bready, sweet. It didn't dry out as much on the back. The aromatics were there, but not as much as the first one. A little bit more clear once you poured it. I really appreciate the fact that it was more gentle and how all the hops kind of blended really well together. The other one was a little bit more sharp and upfront and dank. This one did have a lot of hops in it, but again, for two beers that are both pale ales, you have a huge range of flavor profiles between them, just on a couple of hop differences.
I was going to ask. So this one, it styled itself as an American pale ale.
Correct.
And I want to ask. I mean, oftentimes I'll see just like, pale ale, India pale ale. cloudy pale ale, whatever,
Yeah.
syrupy pale ale. Like what specifically, like, is there something that is attached to the definition of being an American pale ale specifically, as opposed to just a pale ale generally?
So it's not the hops because they use New Zealand Cascade varietal, but it was
Right.
probably raised. Those hops are probably here from Yakima Valley or one of the local growers. Ruse does a lot of that local stuff. The malt bill is going to be simple 2-row pale. It's not going to be anything fancy. And I think easy, simple beers get overlooked. This is a fairly easy beer.
Right.
It's not, the complexity comes from the hops. The malts sit there, allow the hops to kind of express themselves and open up a little bit as it warmed up. It really had a nice presence as far as the flavors marrying up again with the malt. Very gentle in the mouth, rounded. And I think from my standpoint, it was way more approachable than the first one. I liked it more, but I don't think it went with the second half of the movie at all.
Agreed.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
It was like, oh, this is a nice beer to drink while we're watching this violence on the screen.
It's nicely balanced, I think. With the malt, being kind of, it's there, but it's subtle, and then in the hops, and he's kind of fitting together nicely. Brian, before I ask the question though, you were going to say something.
No, I was just going to say that I'm not a big hop head. I really enjoyed this, maybe because of the sweeter malt that came after the bitterness of the hop flavor.
Yeah. And again, like the flavors of this were complete, even though it has like New Zealand Cascade. So Amarillo and Chinook are going to be more traditional West Coast, Northwest style hop for IPA and pale ales. The New Zealand Cascade, so Cascade hops themselves and not the New Zealand varietal, probably not, or the New Zealand version is probably going to be more floral. And this one had a little bit of that floral hit on it. It had, I think, to me, a really nice approach to a pale ale. The only difference between a pale ale and an India pale ale is the alcohol percent. It's above 6%, it's an IPA. If it's below 6%, it'd be considered just a pale ale.
I wonder if I'm wrong on this, because I associate IPAs as having traditionally a more forward hop profile.
Correct. And they can. And this one does have hops. There's aromatics and they're there. It's just they're not super forward.
Right.
So, yeah.
But IPAs don't have to be hoppier, though.
Correct. They don't. It's just, again, the real only clinical difference between the two is the alcohol percent. Okay. But you can have below 6% IPAs if they're sessionable and still have that hop forward dryness. And then all IPAs don't have to be dry. Some of them can be more sweet and balanced, as we've found out over the years of doing this podcast. They can be all over the map. And that's the nice thing about brewing beer is one style has such a broad range to it. And remember, from a judging standpoint, IPAs have 15 subcategories. So there's a lot of different subs specific to how does it look, what kind of hops are you using, is it sweet or dry, alcohol percent, like is it an imperial IPA or a double IPA if it's above 8%. There's a lot of factors that go in. And even then you could have, as you know, it's like baking a cake. You have the base recipe, you little tweak here, a little tweak there, and it's going to be different.
Well, I almost think it's like a house plant, like it's alive.
It is.
And it can be so different depending upon how it grew up.
The conditions, yeah.
And even then, why would you say I use New Zealand Cascade versus standard Cascade? Are you looking for a more floral hit? Was it cheaper? Was it just something that was available? We just don't have that backstory. Maybe there was purpose behind it. Maybe the people they did the Nebulous beer, maybe those guys are the people that run that, wanted to bring that in and try something with it. But again, standard IPA, Chinook and Amarillo, totally standard to use in an IPA.
So you didn't think this went as well with the film?
I liked it better as a beer, but I don't think it went as well.
What would you suggest to drink with this film?
Another strong, really bitter, in your face, or something sour that had a lot of tannin and dryness to it. Something that would set you off. And it didn't even have to be a big beer. It could be just like a Gosa or something that's got some sharpness to it.
A Belgian sour.
Well, yeah, you could go there. I was going to say a triple or a Carmelite, which is a little sweet, a little dry.
Well, does India? I'm thinking of like Singa or Shanghai beer or was it Tsingtao?
Tsingtao, yeah.
I mean, does India have a leading beer brand?
I'm sure there are some. You just can't get them here in the States. I've
Right.
I've seen bottles on a wall, but I've never seen them available for purchase.
Gotcha.
We would have to go to a big metropolitan city that has a large Indian population, and maybe, but you have to bear in
They
mind
would import
their religions in that country don't drink alcohol. A lot of them don't.
Right.
So if they are there, they're not going to be super widely distributed for that reason. If they do alcohol, it's probably going to be wine or hard liquor before it's beer. We did watch, Monkey Boy had it shots in a bar, and there were bottles on, behind the bar, but I didn't see anybody drinking other than hard liquor drinks.
Right.
So I don't know. And perhaps that's something when and if we do that episode, we can kind of dig into that a little bit, because that was a great movie. We should definitely revisit it. And now that we've seen this and have better comparison between life in a big city action versus life in the country, catching the train to go to the big city and then having action.
And then
on
the
train.
whole movie on a train.
And the whole, yes.
And this movie was Kill.
Yes. It had that in the title. It definitely did that a lot on the screen. Not initially, but it did warm up to that notion. Any other thoughts? We did do a water cleanse between the two beers, because I was like, yeah, that Pash the Tinny really, to me, the dankness just sat. And that to me is not necessarily a pleasant flavor profile for me. That's why I was like, it went with the movie because it was harsh. Yeah, if you're going to find something else, find something that's along that lines. I think might help visually stimulate your oral factor as when you're watching the stuff on the screen.
And it would be a good idea to drink some water as you're enjoying your beers,
like
because if you don't hydrate, you're going to kill-drate.
Yes, things are going to get ugly quick. So, yeah, I want to say good movie, good beers. I think
recommended. I think we all
recommend all
it,
three.
yeah.
Definitely check them out if you can. And as always, the opinions expressed during the taping of this recording are those of the host. And just thanks for listening and hanging out a little bit. Check this movie out if you can. It did get released pretty recently. I want to say it is out on all the streaming services, or at least Netflix. And I think Brian or one of you guys mentioned that the rights to the movie have been purchased, so I think they're probably going to remake it with somebody big.
Yeah, that was me. The same company that does John Wick films purchased the remake rights to do this in Hollywood.
Oh, nice. It'll probably be a spin-off of that then. That'd be cool.
But it's well worth dipping your beak into other cinemas, other than American cinema.
100% agree.
Yeah, and there are subtitles. If you're watching it on a streaming service, turn them subtitles on. You definitely need it, because there's very few phrases in English, and most of it, I didn't. I don't know if it's Tagalog or what language was being used on screen. I couldn't tell.
Yeah, I wasn't sure.
I'm not knowledgeable enough.
Urdu or Hindi or I have
probably
no idea.
Hindi, right?
Yeah,
but
so. Anyways, thanks for hanging out and listening, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, listener, for this journey. As always, keep your ticket ready for the conductor.
And this is Brian signing off. Thank you.